Nothing in the Lou Brydges Show is intended to be legal analysis, legal advice, or legal recommendations that would be applicable to your particular situation. Everyone in foreclosure or underwater with their mortgage are encouraged to seek legal counsel for a review of your specific situation. Welcome to the weekly broadcast of the Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about the foreclosure crisis and the greatest financial crime in history that created it. Are you in foreclosure, at risk of foreclosure, or underwater with your mortgage? Do you know someone who is? Every week on this show, you'll get real answers from a real attorney. Lou Brydges will explain options in the foreclosure process. He'll talk about defective mortgages, mortgage restructuring, loan modification, short sale negotiation, and discuss what to look for when choosing a foreclosure defense attorney. Lou is an experienced foreclosure defense lawyer on the front lines of mortgage defense and litigation. Lou is dedicated to helping you keep your property. And now it's time for the Lou Brydges Show and the truth about foreclosure. Here's your host, Lou Brydges.
Good morning, listeners. I'm Lou Brydges, and this is the Lou Brydges Show. I'm here to tell you about a transcendental truth about some things that are going on in our country today and how it may be affecting you. But I want to start this show out with the way I'm going to start every show out. I'm going to read you something, a quote that's been attributed to one of our great founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. And it goes like this. Thomas Jefferson is attributed to saying, "I believe that banking institutions are the most dangerous to our liberties, more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of the currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs." Well, Thomas Jefferson, I don't know if he was some kind of alien or something, but these people were beyond genius. Not only did they leave us with this beautiful Constitution, and not only did Thomas Jefferson write some of the most beautiful words ever written in the Declaration of Independence, but he prophesied what eventually could be the downfall of this great experiment that we undertook a little over 250 years ago. Because what we have today is about 12 major banking institutions that have taken over the majority of banking. And one of the things they've taken over is the servicing, not the lending, but the servicing of mortgage loans. And they did so. We are in the aftermath right now of the housing, so-called housing bubble was an artificial bubble that was created by those banks and investment banks that they worked with that were creating the mortgage-backed securities. And that securitization era from about 1998 to 2008 is being called the greatest crime spree in history. Because what these institutions did, the large investment banks in conjunction with the 12 major banks servicing mortgages, is they bundled and packaged mortgage-backed securities and had sold them already before the mortgages actually were originated, and did so in a manner that created, estimates are $3.5 trillion of illusory capital that didn't really exist. They did this by, you see, the average price of the American residential home increased 131% from 1998 through 2008. That means the house that cost $100,000 in 1998 cost $231,000 in 2008. Now, the price of lumber didn't go up, the price of nails, the price of construction. If anything, the cost of building residential houses went down in a lot because of the large home builders that were building them, the tract houses on these large subdivisions that we see, these massive subdivisions. You see, what they were doing it was essentially a Ponzi scheme. The more the price of real estate went up, the price of real estate went up because there was more money being made available for mortgages. And that caused the price of real estate to go up. And the more the price of real estate goes up, the more attractive mortgage-backed securities look, and the more investment is made in mortgage-backed securities by the mostly public employee retirement funds and that invested in mortgage-backed securities. Which is a good thing, that more public employee retirement funds, it's a great investment in theory. You've got, a mortgage-backed security that is consists of 2,500 mortgages, and if you're the manager of the California Public Employee Retirement Fund, it's a very prudent investment. I mean, you're going to have this steady stream of income every month that you can pay to your pensioners. And the investment doesn't really lose value because, the mortgages don't, you really don't eat into the amount of the mortgage until about year 25. And most mortgages are turned over within 7 years. The house is sold. So the investment doesn't lose value. And the thing is, though, by selling these mortgage-backed securities more and more aggressively, and then they had to produce the mortgages. So they were giving the originators of these mortgages tremendous incentives to just get as many and as big a mortgages as possible, which meant that the originators were manipulating or they were hiring appraisers, because, it's always the originator of the mortgage that hired the appraiser, that continued to increase the value, the cost of real estate. So the Ponzi scheme, much like Bernie Madoff, the more real estate goes up in cost, the more attractive mortgage-backed securities look, and the more money is invested in them, and the more money is available for mortgages, which causes the cost of homes to go up, which makes mortgage-backed securities more profitable or more attractive. So you've got this vicious cycle that leads to this illusory creation of capital, this illusory 131% increase over a 10-year period, more than doubling. And but the one thing is that the one thing all Ponzi schemes have in common, from Holland Tulips, the original one that we study in Economics 101, to the Bernie Madoff, to the illusory housing bubble created by these investment banks and the major mortgage servicers, is that the Ponzi schemes will eventually fail. And on Wall Street, when you can see the future, you can really make money. And the real money was made on what's going to be referred to by the author Michael Lewis as the Big Short. And that is betting that this Ponzi scheme will fail, will fall apart, because it's an illusory creation of capital. And it's like betting on the sun rising in the east tomorrow. So you've got this situation where they're actually creating this bubble, and at the same time the investment banks are buying the credit default swaps, the so-called derivatives, which are essentially an unregulated insurance policy. They're placing a bet that what they're creating is going to fall apart at some point, and which is inevitable. So and that's pretty sick, because at the same time, the investment banker has created this mortgage-backed security. They've sold in the form of a trust. They've sold the beneficial interest, or the securities, to the investors, and now they've made their commission. And 2,500 mortgages at $200,000 is $500 million, and the 1% commission of that is $5 million. And if you're an investment bank and you've got mortgage originators all over the country, you're putting 2, 3, or 4 of those together every day. But 2,500 mortgages of $300,000 is $750 million. A 1% commission is $7.5 million, a $2.5 million difference. And when you're putting together 4 or 5 a day, that's $10 million more every day that you're making. And at the same time, it's going to fail, and they're buying credit default swaps. And the banks are taking the servicing. One thing that every PD needs to understand: banks don't loan their own money. Banks' money is used for operating expenses and salaries and dividends to shareholders. Banks loan other people's money. They either loan in depositors' money, or in the case of mortgage-backed securities, they're loaning the investors' money, the mortgage-backed securities. The banks keep the servicing of the mortgage. And if you service, and they actually, and I'll go into this in the next segment because it's almost time for a break, but the banks actually make a tremendous amount of money servicing mortgages that are in foreclosure. Much more than they would make servicing what are called performing mortgages. So that is why the banks stifled all the efforts at loan modification. The whole HAMP program was an abject failure. It's something like 200,000 or some very minimal number. But there have been over 4 million foreclosures accomplished in 2009, 10, 11, and 12. 4 million American families have been deprived of our homes. Before we break, I want to leave you with one final word. Everyone needs to be disabused of the notion, that is, the notion corrected, that this was that these were liar loans or that this was something where the public was responsible. 20 million Americans didn't wake up one morning between 1998 and 2008 and decide to commit bank fraud that day. But 20 million Americans were the victims of bank fraud. And I'll explain that when we get back to our next session. So this is a break again. This is the Lou Brydges Show. I want to introduce my standby, my sidekick here. I don't know. We really have a definition for him. How about his name? His name is Mike Main. Mike, would you say hello to the listeners?
Hello, Chicagoland.
Mike is here to write things on and tell me to stop rambling and keep track of the time and get me coffee and things. He does more than that. He's my best friend, my good buddy. He bailed me out of jail last night. No, I'm just kidding. You can only count on him. All right, we got just a few seconds left, and we're very strictly timed. So what does that mean? What does that? They're giving me this circle. I can see the 10 seconds. Anyway, the Lou Brydges Show. We'll look forward to explaining to you more about this and telling you in future shows some of your options.
Welcome back to the Lou Brydges Show with Louis Brydges, one of Chicago's leading foreclosure defense attorneys. Here's Lou to tell you what to look for when hiring a foreclosure defense attorney and how to avoid being conned on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, listeners, this is Lou Brydges again with my sidekick here, Mike Main. The Lou Brydges Show, talking about the foreclosure crisis and trying to communicate to the public of this country some truths about and to correct some misnotions about things. And one of the great misnotions is that this housing bubble was created by a bunch of homeowners speculating in their house, using their house as an investment, overstating their income, somehow being involved in overstating the value of the property, even though the mortgage originator hired the appraiser, getting themselves in over their heads. And that is not the truth. There were a handful of people that were flipping homes and taking advantage of things like that, but they were getting in and out real fast. They were basically, they didn't even realize that they were kind of onto something where there was this unjustifiable continual increase in the cost of American homes. I've mentioned before the 131% increase in the average cost of American homes from 1998 to 2008, which, just to put in terms easier to grasp as, a $100,000 house in 1998 was $231,000 in 2008. 10 years later, the same house. Now, I've been an attorney for 33 years. I have a lot of experience in the construction industry doing mechanics liens, which is a lien on the property for the value of the labor and materials provided. And I will tell you, a builder will tell you that most homes you can build for about $70, $75 a foot. So 102,000 square foot homes, $150,000, $10,000 for the lot, it's $160,000. But by 2008, homes are going for, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. They've doubled and 131% increase. Now, this was something that was not caused by homeowners that make you doing liar loans or speculating on homes or, getting themselves in over their head. This was done by those who were bundling, who would profit. You always got to look at who profits from some sort of bubble. Well, the parties that profit in this fold are two main parties. And one is the investment banks that are putting together the mortgage-backed securities. And again, I've used the example, if you're a typical mortgage-backed security, a CDO consists of 2,500 mortgages. And it's sold to a public employee retirement fund, which, is a good investment for the retirement fund. And it's actually, in concept, it's a great thing that, public employee workers and even private workers, they're putting aside money for their retirement. That money's invested, and it's invested in mortgages, residential mortgages, so that people can, have a source to borrow money to buy their home and raise their families and all that. But as for any good concept, there are those who will look for a way to profit at it and not carry out the noble motives. And when the investment banks invented the unregulated investment tool called the credit default swap, And combined with the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guarantees that were put in place to try to encourage home ownership, wider spread home ownership in America, you had a situation ripe for Wall Street to take advantage of it. The way they took advantage of it was not by being the victims of liar loans or anything. No. How could there be 20 million liar loans? I mean, you've got an originator whose job is to verify the income. And the homeowner provides their tax returns for 3 years, their pay stubs, verification from their employer, and the originator fills out the application. And most of you, if you've ever bought a home, you know that you didn't even see the application until you sat down at the closing, which, by the way, is a violation of federal regulations. You're supposed to see it 3 days ahead of time. The application was filled out by the originator. And the originator is making a huge commission. The originators have been given tremendous incentives. There were originators that were making $500,000, $600,000 a year just originating mortgages. And who's paying that? Wall Street is paying that from the money that they've raised by selling the mortgage-backed securities before the mortgage is even entered into. Because they need to get these 2,500 mortgages. So they say the originators, do anything you can, but get me 2,500 mortgages. I need 2,500 mortgages today. At the beginning, that's how it was. And then it was, I need 2,500 mortgages this morning, and I need another 2,500 this afternoon because I've sold the mortgage-backed securities. And under Securities and Exchange Commission regulations, I have 90 days to actually get the mortgages into the trust. So I don't care. Give them a 0% starter rate. And you know what? And then, tell them you could afford this house. You fit the guidelines. Your income puts you in where you can afford this house. The homeowner is relying upon the originator, who is a supposed expert, and the originator is looking at guidelines that are promulgated as regulations by the federal government, by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA. And they're being told you can afford this. It's going to cost you X dollars per month because it's going to be 0%. Most homeowners would say, okay, that's great, but what happens in 2 years when the interest rate kicks in? I'm not going to be able to afford the mortgage then on my income. Don't worry. We'll get you a new mortgage. We'll get you a 0% mortgage. Another 0% mortgages, and houses are going up 10, 11% every year. In 2 years, your house will gone up 20%. You'll actually walk out of that closing in 2 years when we refinance and get you another 0% mortgage. You'll walk out of that closing with money in your pocket. It's the smart thing to do. You got to raise your kids. This is a good school system here. And, you can afford this. Believe me, mortgages, and this is what was done. And the originators are violating a whole mess, an entire, a smorgasbord of federal regulations and laws. And they're doing anything they can because the originator is getting a tremendous incentive. And if you ever bought a home, remember who hired the appraiser. Well, you paid for it, but the appraiser was hired by that originator. And that originator was hiring that appraiser, and they were sending him 200-300 appraisals a year. If the appraiser gave the appraisal that was, enough to get the home bought. I took a deposition of an appraiser once, and I said, how many appraisals did you do for Countrywide that year? I did 300 appraisals. That's like we're one a day. And okay, how many of them were enough to satisfy the asking price of the property, and so the homeowner could buy the loan? All 300. Not one was was less than the X. Oh, most of them were 10, 20% more than the homeowner was buying the home for. That's what we were told to do. And, this is a lie that becomes almost a self-substantiating lie, because after a while you can say, well, that house sold for $300,000, and that house sold for $300,000 based on the appraisal. And so now you've got, the lies start to justify themselves to some extent. But it's all based on a lie, and everything is See, I believe in this light, this force, this transcendental force. You may call it God. I call it the truth, because it's all about the truth and not the truth, lies. And the truth is invincible. If you make the truth your partner, because lies always require more lies. Every lie requires 3 lies to cover it up. And that's what we had here. And it wasn't the homeowners who were committing the lies. I've seen applications. I cannot tell you the number of times we've been given a case and we looked at the application that the homeowner was given right at the closing along with 50 other documents to sign. And I know they're signing something that says, I have reviewed this and the information is accurate. But as a practical matter, it's not done, and it's not done because they weren't given the application 3 days ahead of time as required by law. And that was done because the originator had changed the numbers. How can it be that they gave tax returns and to pay stubs that showed they made $80,000 a year, and the application says $180,000 a year? Somehow a 1 got slipped in there. I can't tell you the number of times we've seen the 6 turn 60,000 turn to 80,000. It's just it should never have happened. I mean, how could there ever be a liar loan if the originator's doing his job? Because when the government guaranteed the loan, before the government, as part of the government guarantees, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the originator has to certify to the government that they complied with an entire smorgasbord and a whole slew of regulations. Among those, how the appraisal was conducted, how that they verified the income, and that all the information was accurate, and they didn't make any promise about a refinance. Okay, this is about the end of this segment. In the next segment, I'm going to talk more about how it was not the homeowners, but the homeowners who were the perpetrators of this greatest crime in history, but the homeowners, the 20 million homeowners in America that are still underwater, were the victims of the greatest financial crime spree in history, perpetrated by our banking institutions, and it continues to this day in the frauds that are being perpetrated, being in the courts and everything. So stay tuned for our next segment. We're going to break now.
Lou Brydges of the law firm Brydges & O and Associates, one of the leading foreclosure defense firms in the Chicago area, rejoins you now on the Lou Brydges Show. Here's Lou on how you might avoid foreclosure and deal with a mortgage that's underwater.
Hello, I'm Lou Brydges again in the Lou Brydges Show. And yeah, I know the intro says we're going to start telling you how to deal with foreclosure and what to do if you're underwater. And we're going to cover that. But the way I'm covering that is by first giving a broad brush outline to correct some misnotions. And the one we were dealing with in the last segment I want to continue on is this so-called housing bubble was not created by 20 million homeowners waking up one morning between 1998 and 2008 and deciding to commit bank fraud that day. No, it was an artificial bubble created by those who profited from it, and that was those who were bundling and packaging mortgage-backed securities. And just to reiterate again, the thing is if a mortgage-backed security is a collateralized debt obligation, as trust issues beneficial interest based on 2,500 mortgages that it acquires and owns. And so the beneficiaries, the investors in the trust, are going to share in the steady flow cash stream, which is why it's a perfect investment for the manager of a public employee retirement fund, the California Public Employee Retirement Fund. 100,000 employees, every month of millions of dollars coming in that need to be invested because there's going to be people retiring. So these are sold aggressively. Now, and one of the things that is created that is really sort of been blamed correctly as one of the major culprits that was was an investment vehicle created by was actually invented by some kids at J.P. Morgan, but that's another story. It's called the credit default swap, the derivative, which essentially is an insurance policy. Because I imagine the conversation with something like this. You've got this, investment banker who's putting together this mortgage-backed security, and he's selling it to the manager of some public employee retirement fund. And he says, well, these 2,500 mortgages, they're going to produce this much and that. And he says, the investment manager said, well, what if there's a lot of what if there's a catastrophic occurrence and there's a lot of defaults in these mortgages? And the investment banker says, historically, there has never in history been more than a 2% default rate in mortgages, which 2,500 mortgages is going to be 50 defaults. So there's going to be 50, and there's going to be private mortgage insurance that's going to pay that. Well, I still need to be more protected. You know what? We've invented this tool that makes you even more protected. And we're going to include that in the sale. You see, it's called the derivative, the credit default swap, which is if there's more than about 10 or 20% default rate, is going to come in and pay those. Well, who's going to issue those? Well, American Insurance Group is going to issue those. Because I had a conversation earlier with them. That conversation went something like this. The mortgage banker says, we need to give some protection to the manager of the public employee retirement fund that's going to buy this, the shares of this mortgage-backed security. So we need to have some tool. We'll give you $10 million, and you got to, and all you have to do is issue a policy called a credit default swap, so it's not regulated by state insurance commissioners. Credit default swap that is going to pay if there's more than a 20% default rate. All right, and so the guy from AIG says, wait a minute, let me get this straight. There's never been more than a 2% default rate in mortgages in the history of this country, and anywhere in the history of this country, anytime, even during the Depression, it was not more than about 3 or 4%. And you're going to give me $10 million, and all I got to do is pay the mortgages if there's more than a 20% default rate. Yeah, and the investment banker says, yeah, but this public employee, this manager of this public employee retirement fund, he's got to be fully protected. And you're going to give me $1 million kickback for getting you this business because there's no competition, because it's such a complex tool. No one understands it, and it's not an insurance policy. There's a lot of competition. It's basically you and Lehman Brothers that are issuing these things. And so, you're going to make a tremendous fortune on this. And there's a thing that's kind of arisen in American businesses, particularly in Wall Street businesses, is it's not about the future. It's about right now. You make a lot of money for the corporation or the investment bank right now, and you get these $20, $30, $50 million bonuses. Never mind what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, because something, let me fill you in on something. You get a $20 million bonus. You might not be working in 2 or 3 years. You might retire to the Cayman Islands or Costa Rica or somewhere. In fact, if you made the $20 million bonus the way these guys made it, it probably would be a good idea to retire to the Cayman Islands or Costa Rica and not stick around for the fallout of what they've sold. And that's what happened. Lehman Brothers is forced to declare itself bankrupt. And AIG is about to go next when they had to pay off on these credit default swaps. And AIG was too big to fail because AIG insures most of the shipping and aviation in the world. And if AIG stopped paying off on the insurance policies, call it a credit default swap or insurance policy that they issued, we were this close, and I got my fingers about an inch apart, we were this close to global famine of a biblical scale. Because if the shipping and the airplanes stop going, because they're not insured, because AIG is not paying its insurance obligations for the policies it's issued, and AIG is, defunct or bankrupt, then you are talking, the concepts about what would have happened go from global famine to mass plague to, because you wouldn't have had, medicines and things. It could have been, they had to be, they were too big to fail. The banks aren't too big to fail. We should have let them go. But AIG did have to be bailed out. And they were bailed out by, well, you guessed it, you and me, the taxpayer. And you know who they paid a lot of those credit default swaps to? The very same investment banks that had put together the mortgage-backed securities, knowing it was a bunch of crap, and were betting on this failure. So that is that is part of the element of the greatest financial crime spree in history. I'll be back after.
We now return to the Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about the foreclosure crisis and the greatest financial crime in history. Here's Lou Brydges, an attorney on the front lines of the ongoing battle for our land.
Hello, this is Lou Brydges again, and we were talking about the greatest financial crime spree in history perpetrated by the Wall Street banks and continuing to this day by the major banks that services the mortgages of this country. And we need to casually read the newspapers to see about all the abuses, so-called abuses in the foreclosure crisis. Let's cut through the, BS, I can say. It's not an abuse. It's fraud upon the court. Massive, widespread, systemic frauds upon the court. Because this gets very complicated, and I really can't go into this. You can go to our website and see a little more about this. It's fightillinoisforeclosures.com. It's Scott Moe, my partner, who's one of the most brilliant attorneys I've ever come across. We just became partners. We were both doing foreclosure defense and workout consultation, and I found a guy that was doing it. I thought as dedicated and not necessarily just for the profit, but in it for because this is important. And in the long run, this greatest crime and all this is going on, and all this $3.5 trillion of artificial capital that was created and stolen by these banks. I really believe that ultimately this will all be a good thing, because there's going to be a balancing out, and there's a lot of people, more and more every day, getting onto this. And I know this is a conservative talk show station, and Elizabeth Warren is not a very popular person here, but Elizabeth Warren is head of the Senate Banking Committee, And she's onto this, and there's a lot more onto this. Professor Adam Levitin at Georgetown University has emerged as the leading academic authority on the legal aspects of the foreclosure crisis. He testified before the Financial Crisis Investigation Commission, the congressional commission that was put together to do an initial investigation back in 2010, I think it was, of the housing, because this brought down a world economy. I mean, this didn't just cause this didn't just cause 4 million homeowners so far to lose their homes, and one of the things that got me into this, I've been an attorney for 33 years, and I've made my thing, but I really came back full bore to be into this, because I go down to King County, Florida. King County, Florida, that's where Fort Myers and Cape Coral is. Got some place in Cape Coral, just a little. There are entire subdivisions that are vacant, from foreclosures, and they haven't been sold, and the houses are decaying, and there's lizards moving in and out, and there's mold, and there's graffiti on the wall. Entire subdivisions, 200 homes. Meanwhile, the school buses are going down Motel Row into the Walmart parking lots to pick up the children in the morning. And this is not what America is supposed to be. That's why I got into this, because more and more people, and starting with a couple of attorneys down in Florida, Max Gardner and Neil Garfeld, who's kind of the father of foreclosure defense, and Jeff Barnes, started saying, wait a minute, they don't own the mortgage. They are the servicer. And the party who owns the mortgage would be much better off and would much prefer to restructure, and that is reduce the principal balance. Well, if you're underwater, a loan modification is not a good deal. In fact, it's a bad deal. Let me illustrate. Say you've got a $200,000 mortgage on a house worth $100,000. Well, very roughly speaking, on a $200,000 mortgage, you're going to pay $600,000, 3 times the amount of the mortgage, over a 30-year period. You're not going to pay it over 30 years, but just for illustration, I'm doing this. A $100,000 mortgage, you're going to pay $300,000. $600,000, $100,000, so you're overpaying by $300,000 for something that's only worth $100,000. That is $300,000 is 360 payments in a mortgage. That's almost $1,000 a month. Now, you want to talk about stimulating the economy, have the banks restructure, force the banks, and it would be better for the actual trusts that own the mortgages, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA that own mortgages. It would be better if they would restructure, reduce the principal balance, because a performing note and mortgage is far better than them taking a house in foreclosure. They have, in a foreclosure, they've got costs, they've got attorney's fees, they got the huge fees that the banks are charging. The banks that service the mortgages are charging for servicing a mortgage that's in foreclosure, which is something I'll get into in another show, how it's so profitable for them. And at the end of the day, it's a $100,000 house, and you're going to hire a real estate broker. And if you've kicked out the homeowner, you're going to have to maintain it. The nationwide statistics say that in a foreclosure situation, the net is about 2 years down the road is about 45% of the value, 45 to 55%. So you're looking at a situation where my $100,000 house with a $200,000 mortgage, which obviously the average is about $150,000 with a $250,000 mortgage, but let's use that as the example. $150,000 house, $50,000 mortgage. By foreclosing, you're going to net 2 to 3 years down the road, you're going to net about $75,000. But if you just restructured, you'd have a performing note and mortgage at $150,000 today by reducing that principal balance. And that's what we go for at Brydges Owen Associates, is we fight foreclosures, and we come up with, all the defenses and affirmative defenses and discovery and request to admit and subpoenas, and we make it impossible. We make it very difficult. And in many cases, the banks are unable to foreclose. So we're at a stalemate. Well, stalemate is not, the ultimate end game. The ultimate end game is restructuring. There are 20 million mortgages, 20 million families in this country that are underwater. That is, they owe more in the mortgage than the house is worth. It's really, some would say it's financially imprudent to pay on a mortgage that is more than the house is worth. And if it's double what the house is worth, or $100,000 more than the house is worth, well, then some would say it's more than financially imprudent. They would say it's expletive stupid to do it. We're going to talk more in the next session and in future shows about what some options you can have if you're underwater with your mortgage, if you're facing foreclosures. But remember one thing, no matter what, Never give up the land. The land is the real estate. It's the only thing that's real. Never give up the land. Lou Brydges will be back after this break.
Welcome back to the Lou Brydges Show with Lou Brydges, one of Chicago's leading foreclosure defense attorneys. Here's Lou to tell you what to look for when hiring a foreclosure defense attorney and how to avoid being conned on AM 560. The Answer.
Hello, this is Lou Brydges again, and this is our final segment of the Lou Brydges Show. This is actually a tape show that we're doing the first time, and, I tell you that because, again, the theme of the show was going to be the truth, what I call the transcendental power, the truth. And I started this show by reading the quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson. I want to revisit that again because I think now in context, hopefully you're starting to understand that this is a very real threat. But I also think that this is something good, eventually good, because Americans always arise to the occasion. And what we have here is these banks doing exactly what Thomas Jefferson prophesied, trying to take away the land. And there are a very, very, very small percentage of people that have used their powers and skills and talents and blessings and education and background and experience and all their blessings that they were given to try to screw their fellow Americans. And that's a very small percentage because most people, I think, are looking for a purpose in their life where they're going to use their blessings and skills and talents to contribute to their people, to their tribe, if you will, to make them better. And they feel that, how good you feel when you do something good for somebody else, and how much better you feel when you devote your attention to doing something constructive and helping on the others. And you're not doing it for return, for a quid pro quo. You're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And when we all do that, so we see that there is evil and there is lies and deception, but it gives us an opportunity to be, to do the opposite. Because if you look at it philosophically, if there is no lie, if there's no evil, there can be no good. Because good is the doing something other than what is wrong. And lies. Thomas Jefferson said, I believe that our banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. This is at the beginning of our country. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children wake up homeless on a continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Now, if you don't think that they've already started to take over the government, then you need to look at this situation involving the Office of Comptroller of the Currency. You understand 2 years ago, the Office of Comptroller of the Currency allowed the banks to conduct what are called private foreclosure reviews, to review the 1.5 million foreclosures that have been accomplished in 2009 and 2010. They only completed 250,000, and then they paid the OCC. They went back and were allowed to not do them. You know why? Because even though they were allowed to use their own independent auditors, and they used very suspect means in their review of the foreclosures, and they cherry-picked the ones, they found that between 30 at the low end, 80% of the foreclosures that had been accomplished in 2009 and 2010 were based on some fraud upon the court. Massive. You extrapolate that numbers to the total number of foreclosures those 2 years, that means that 750,000 American families were wrongfully dispossessed of their homes by the major banks that service the mortgages in this country from 2009 to 2010, and it continues to this day. But we're not going to let that happen because we're going to stand up and fight. I'm not the only attorney who's doing this. There's others. There's others who do it right. There's some who, like anything else, making a scam. In future shows, we're going to talk more about this. Join us for Lou Brydges Show.
You've been listening to the weekly radio broadcast of the Lou Brydges Show with attorney Lou Brydges, telling the truth about foreclosure. Have you received threats of foreclosure? Are you in a foreclosure right now, seeking a loan modification, considering strategic default, or any other legal action? Know and protect your rights, and do not give up the land. Lou Brydges' passion is to help you keep your home and achieve your legal goals. To receive a free consultation, which may help you decide how to defend against foreclosure, understand your options, and learn what to look for in choosing a foreclosure defense attorney, call 224-513-1231. That's 224-513-1231. Or visit FightIllinoisForeclosures.com. That's FightIllinoisForeclosures.com. Get real answers from a real foreclosure defense firm and discover the legal tools at your disposal Tune into AM 560 The Answer next Saturday morning at 8 for the Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about foreclosure.